This video is about what I know about HTTP requests that are GET requests. More specifically, I'm talking about creating a hyperlink on my page, which will take me to another page, and while doing that, it'll submit some parameters with their values. So the first thing I want to make sure that I understand is the parts of the href, which is the href is the attribute of the a tag, which is the hyperlink. So what are the parts of the URL which supplies this href? First, there's the protocol, the colon, and then the domain. What I just described is the whole portion up to this point. Next, there's the web page, and this could be just the name of a web page if that page is in Apache's web directory. But it could be deeper down in a folder or several folders down. So this place over here can be a whole path. And the path is relative to Apache's web folder. Then there's a question mark. Then there is a series of variables with their values. And that's what I call the query parameter list. Each parameter has a name and a value, and it's separated from the next parameter by an ampersand sign. The script, which is on the receiving end of this hyperlink, will receive these parameters in the superglobal called $_get. There are going to be a bunch of PHP functions that are built in that I will need to use in order to make this code bug-free. 3 of them are these 3: URL decode, URL encode, and HTML special characters. URL decode will not need to be used directly because it is run automatically before the variables, the parameters, before they go into the get superglobal array. So these are the 2 that I need to worry about. These 2 functions here are archetypes. In other words, they represent 2 different types of functions. URL encode, for example, this represents also another function called raw URL encode. HTML special chars also represents another function called HTML entities. So first, let me look at URL encode, that archetype. One of the challenges that we have when transmitting parameters via the URL is the fact that some of the characters in the value and some of the characters in the name of the parameter may be characters which have special meaning in a URL. In other words, they are reserved URL characters. There is 15 of those: the ampersand, the question mark, the colon, the plus sign, the asterisk, square brackets, round brackets. So what URL encode deals with is how to make it safe to put these parameters in the URL. Because remember, anything that goes in a URL should be able to go in the URL box of a browser. So what URL encode does is it substitutes the reserved URL characters with certain codes that have a % sign in them. And this is taken care of by URL encode. HTML special characters, on the other hand, deals with a different problem. It deals with reserved HTML characters, and there is 4 of those. Basically, the problem with those is when you have a hyperlink and you put it in your HTML for the page, the browser is going to look at that code for the hyperlink. And if it sees within that code characters like the less than sign, and that's one of the biggest one of them, it's going to interpret that as an opening tag. So we need to get rid of the reserved HTML characters from the code for our hyperlink. So to do that, we use HTML special chars function. It will basically take those special characters like the less than sign, and it will substitute their HTML entities. For example, the less than sign, the HTML entity for it is an ampersand LT semicolon. So this now brings us to another thing, which is when do you use the function called HTML special chars, and when do you use its counterpart, which is in the same archetype, which is called HTML entities. Well, HTML special chars replaces characters with their entities only if they are one of the 4 HTML special characters, whereas HTML entities function will replace any character that has an HTML entity with its HTML entity. So actually, both of these functions serve the same purpose, but HTML entities is more drastic. And the reason you would want to go with that more drastic function is to deal with an issue which browsers have. And the issue is as follows. When we type text into a text editor, that text is UTF-8 encoded. It can have smiley faces or any other one of the millions of UTF characters. But web browsers only understand ISO 8859 character set. So when they see a smiley face, they're not going to render it as a smiley face. So it's going to help to encode that smiley face as an HTML entity. Now, if the code that you are concerned about, the HTML that you are concerned about, is not going to have a smiley face or any of those higher order UTF-8 characters, you might want to just stick with the basic HTML special chars function. So which function gets applied to which part of the URL? URL encode will be applied to the values of the parameters. Raw URL encode will be applied to the path to the file. And the difference between those is the way that they handle the space character. The raw URL encode substitutes a %20 for the space character, whereas just the plain URL encode substitutes a plus sign for a space. Now, reserved HTML characters. Those are a problem for text that's in the page that you are trying to render in the browser. So since here we are just talking about presenting a hyperlink in the browser, there are 2 cases where we would have a problem that needs to be solved. One is the actual text for the hyperlink. The other problem is the URL itself. The URL is the part that goes in the href of the A-link for the hyperlink. If that has reserved HTML characters, then that would present a problem when rendering the page. So the solution, which I will use in Underdog, my web app, is I will apply the HTML entities function on both the link text and page content text and the URL text. The URL text which goes into the hyperlink. Now, I had a concern about doing this, which is to use HTML special chars on the URL part. Because the URL part has characters like, for example, the ampersand, which are important in the context of a URL. So in my mind, if we switch the ampersand with the HTML entity for an ampersand, which is another ampersand and then AMP semicolon, I was worried that that would cause a problem in the browser when someone clicks on that link. But what I found out is as soon as the browser receives the page with this hyperlink, it will take all the HTML entities and transform them into the characters that they represent. And that's what will end up being part of the hyperlink. So the HTML entity for the ampersand won't be there anymore. But we needed to put it there initially in our PHP script so that the browser, when it receives the page, does not interpret that in the context of HTML, but in the context of a character to be used in a hyperlink as a URL when the hyperlink is clicked. So, in conclusion, here are the rules. Number 1, the path to the page, we raw URL encode that path. The value of each parameter, we URL encode that. The entire URL, after it's been assembled and encoded, we run that through the HTML special cars. Or actually, we may want to run it through HTML entities function. The link text, we need to run that through HTML entities. At least that would be the way that I would do it. Remember, HTML special cars and HTML entities are interchangeable, those two functions. It all depends on what you anticipate to have in the text that you are transforming. And that'll be it for this video.